Hello everybody, my name is Liam Doran from Accountancyschool.ie, and the purpose behind this presentation is to run through what's involved in advanced financial management, particularly for anybody who might be considering which option subjects to choose. Advanced financial management, as the name kind of implies, follows on from financial management that would have been covered at the skills level, and it very much builds on the material that would have been covered at the financial management paper. And if you've recently covered financial management, you'll probably be aware that the main topics that were covered on the syllabus include investment appraisal, company valuations, a bit of working capital management, cost of capital and how we calculate and derive a cost of capital. You'll have looked at various sources of finance, and you'll have been introduced to interest rate risk and currency risk. And the AFM paper examines pretty much all of that material, with the exception perhaps of working capital management. Working capital management doesn't tend to come up per se on the AFM paper, but all of the other material very much underpins what they examine at AFM. And then what they do at the AFM level is they introduce a couple of additional topics. So for example, in investment appraisal, they incorporate the ability for you to be able to calculate adjusted present value and to understand when adjusted present value might be an appropriate technique to use when you're trying to appraise an investment. We get introduced to real options, and that brings us into the whole realm of the Black-Scholes option pricing model, and how we do have, on the syllabus, we have 4 real options that we need to be able to identify, and we need to be able to calculate the value that exists when you have this real option. We look at concepts such as value at risk, and we also introduce concepts, I should say, such as modified internal rate of return. So there are a couple of additional topics that are added onto the basic material that you would have covered at the earlier level. In addition to that, mergers and acquisitions is examinable. The whole area of option pricing, including things such as the Greeks, delta hedging, those kind of calculations, they're quite interesting. They involve a number of calculations that you have to understand what the answers mean. And then you need to be able to use the answers that you get in order to be able to give advice. Reorganizations and reconstructions is quite important. So for example, you might be involved in a demerger, you might be involved in advising a company on a spin-off. You could be looking at a scenario where a company has been kind of not performing very well financially in the recent past, and you're looking at alternative methods that might be open to the company to try and get through that difficult period that they've gone through. And you might have to give advice with regards to, should they liquidate? Should they put in place a scheme of reorganization, which might have been proposed, for example, by the board of directors? And then what you have to be able to deal with are more advanced issues surrounding foreign currency and interest rate risk. So we have derivative contracts such as forward contracts, futures contracts, option contracts, swaps, swaptions, and so on. Okay, on this paper, you're guaranteed that 2 topics will come up on every single diet. The 2 topics that are guaranteed on the paper are advanced investment appraisal and treasury management. Advanced investment appraisal means that you're going to have to be able to calculate an NPV, an IRR, an MIRR, an APV, the duration of a project. You might have to deal with real options that exist in a project and put a value on those real options, but something with regards to investment appraisal is guaranteed. In addition to that, you're guaranteed to get a question on treasury management. And treasury management kind of concentrates on interest rate risk and currency risk. And you'll need to be able to identify in that question the risks that exist, and you'll need to be able to give advice with regards to how we might hedge against those risks and what appropriate techniques or derivatives might be useful. The format of the paper, similar to the other option subjects, you've got 3 questions. The 3 questions are split into Section A and Section B. Section A is a 50-marker case study. It'll have approximately 6 to 9 individual requirements. It will examine a number of syllabus topics. So there might, for example, be a bit of foreign currency risk and interest rate risk and a bit of investment appraisal, and there could be some reorganizations, there could be a bit of dividend policy, a number of individual syllabus topics. Approximately 60% of the marks available in question 1 will be for calculations, and approximately 40% of the marks will be available for discussion. There will be 10 marks available for professional marks in question 1. So as part of the 50, 10 of those will be available for professional marks, which I'll talk about in a moment. Section B of the paper has 2 questions. They're each for 25 marks. And what they tend to do is hone in on 1 syllabus topic. Now, that's not guaranteed, but that's what tends to happen. So there might be a question, for example, on securitization, or there might be a question, for example, on interest rate risk, or for example, on mergers and acquisitions. And again, what they tend to do is they split the marks, ballpark, about 60% for calculation and 40% for discussion. And what we're guaranteed in the section B questions is that there will be 5 marks available for professional marks. So in total on the paper, there will be 20 marks available for professional marks, and that's split into 10 marks in question 1 and then 5 marks in each of question 2 and 3. All 3 questions on the paper are compulsory. Okay, a little example of the style of requirements that come up in question 1. This is from a relatively recent exam paper. It's a 50-marker question. You can see there's quite a number of individual requirements. First thing asks you to discuss the feasibility and the effectiveness of the defence strategies of selling off individual garden centres and enhancing directors' remuneration. And you can see from the verb there, it's to discuss, which means that that's purely discussion question or discussion answer that needs to be given to the question. Second thing that they ask you to do is prepare a report for the Board of Directors of Kington. And that's where your professional marks start to kick in. You're going to be given marks for the format of the report that you give. But then they want you to estimate the company's cost of capital before the new bonds are issued. They want you to estimate the market value and the post-tax cost of debt of the new bonds. They want you to estimate the revised cost of equity and the revised cost of capital if the new bonds are issued. And you can see there that each of those 3 verbs involve you to estimate a figure, which means you're into your calculations. They then want you to discuss the impact of Kington's cost of capital and the reaction of equity and bondholders to the Chief Executive's proposal. The discussion should include an explanation of any assumptions made in estimates that you performed in parts B1 to B3 above. Now, that's very much application. That's very much you having done your calculations to be able to use the information that you've gotten from your calculations in an application style solution. And what becomes very important at AFM is your ability to be able to use the information that's given in the case, because this is about you demonstrating your technical knowledge of financial management, but in a practical setting, so that you're able to apply your knowledge to circumstances that are given in the exam. Okay, part C then is to discuss the approach taken to employee remuneration by Kington's Northern region and the issues associated with it. And you can see down at the bottom that the professional marks, which will be awarded for the demonstration of the skill in communication, commercial acumen, analysis, skepticism and evaluation in your answer are going to be giving you 10 marks. And that's one of the big changes to September 2022 moving forward. This is going to be the case for all of your option subjects, that there's going to be 20 professional marks available in the exam. And you can see the 4 headings there. We've got communication, we've got commercial acumen, we've got analysis, and then we've got skepticism and evaluation. All right. Second style of question then is a question that comes up in section B. It tends to be a specific topic that they examine from the syllabus. And in the section B questions, there's 25 marks in total. 5 of those 25 marks are available for your professional marks. And you can see here that they want you to evaluate the suitability of the investment proposal in Canvia, including the impact of the country risk premium on the net present value of the project. Now, when you get involved in evaluate, you need to be able to do calculations that will back up your evaluation, but you need to give discussion as well. So when you give an evaluation, you have discussion backed up with calculations. They want you to discuss the validity of the Chief Executive's reasons for adjusting the discount rate used in appraising the project in Canvia. And you can see basically that what we're looking at examining here is investment appraisal. And then you can see that there are 5 professional marks being awarded. And the 5 professional marks are for commercial acumen, analysis, skepticism, and evaluation in your answer. Okay, 2 questions in section B usually tend to hone in on one specific syllabus topic. 1 question in section A tends to examine a number of individual syllabus topics. They break the requirements down. That's going to have a big impact on how you allocate your time inside in the exam, and you're guaranteed to get professional marks. Okay, what do you need to pass? In order to pass advanced financial management, and I know this is stating the obvious, but you do need to get 50%. But it also means that you can get 50% wrong and still get over the line. So, you know, like all exams, you want to try and get to 50% inside in the exam as quickly as you can. And then as soon as you've that achieved, you're out the gap. But you do need to get to that 50%. And in order to do so, it does involve you having a fairly good understanding of the basics of the individual topics that come up on the syllabus. It also requires that you're going to be able to get through the questions, which will be very time pressured in the appropriate amount of time. Because a lot of people will tell you who have sat this exam in the past that they ran out of time much quicker than they had expected. The only way that you can get good at being able to manage your time is to practice as many questions in exam conditions as you can. And a lot of the calculations that we have to deal with, they tend to be quite repetitive. So the more you practice them, the quicker and the more efficient you get at them. You need to be able to give discussion. You need to be able to explain what calculations you've done. You need to understand the answers that you've calculated, what they mean. You need to be able to give advice. You need to be able to give recommendations. And you need to pick up as many of the professional marks as you can. A good knowledge of the material that was covered at the FM paper is a prerequisite for this. Now, look, I know immediately when people hear that, they think, it's a while since I've done the financial management paper, or when I did the financial management paper, I struggled a bit with it, or when I did financial management, I concentrated on small syllabus topic areas that I was confident would come up, and I was lucky they did come up, and I'm not really comfortable with the other material that I hadn't spent as much time studying. That's common, all right? At the end of the day, however, we will go through in the course everything that you would have been expected to cover at the financial management level, but we'd be going through it a bit more quickly than you would have covered it for your financial management exam. So, you know, not now knowing what came up on financial management or not now being comfortable with the financial management syllabus isn't a problem. But as soon as you start preparing for AFM, that's your starting point. Making sure that you do get up to speed with the technical material that would have been covered at the FM level, and then adding on top of that the advanced financial management syllabus topics, and making sure that you're practicing questions in exam conditions. Okay, if we go through the list here, I mentioned obviously you want to get 50%, a sound knowledge of the FM subject from the skills level as a prerequisite, your ability to be able to identify what techniques are appropriate in a given scenario. So you'll tend to find at the strategic professional level that the exam questions are not as specific as they might be, or as they were, I should say, at the skills level, whereby they won't ask you necessarily calculate a cost of capital. They might ask you to evaluate. And if they ask you to evaluate, what they're doing is they're leaving it up to you to identify what techniques are appropriate, and then for you to apply those techniques in a practical setting. You want to try and get as many of the professional marks as you can. There's 20 of them available on the paper, and question practice is key. And I can't stress that enough. You need to be practicing exam questions in exam conditions from as early into your studies as you can, so that you can get to see the repetitive nature of a number of the individual syllabus topics and get comfortable with what calculations are appropriate in what given scenarios. Okay, now I've mentioned already these professional skills marks. I'll be going through this in a bit more detail on the main course proper, but each of the 4 option papers for September 2022 moving forward, with the exception of advanced tax. This is only going to become relevant for advanced tax in December 2022. But each of the 4 option subjects are going to be awarding professional marks. And for anybody who's already done Strategic Business Leader, SBL, you'll have been exposed to this. The 20 marks are being awarded under 4 individual kind of umbrella areas. So the first one is communication, the second one is analysis and evaluation, the third one is skepticism and judgment, and the final one is commercial acumen. The question will specify how many marks are available for the professional marks. There will be 10 marks available in question 1, and there will be 5 marks available in question 2 and 3 each. The question will specify which of those 4 areas you need to cover in order for you to be able to get the full complement of professional marks. Now, briefly, what's involved in each. When we're looking at communication, we're looking at your ability to be able to present your answer in the format that's being requested, cognizant of who it is you're reporting to. So if you're reporting to a HR manager probably won't have as much financial knowledge as, for example, the finance director would have. So your wording and your explanations will have to reflect that. You'll be asked in the question, perhaps for a report, you need to give it in a report format. You need to know what a report looks like. You're going to have to do calculations in order to back up an evaluation. The calculations should be relegated to an appendix, and the appendix therefore should be calculated and performed in the spreadsheet option that will be available in the computer-based exam. So communication is all about your ability to be able to communicate effectively to the parties that you've been asked to communicate to. So if we have a look here, responding in a professional manner and adhering to any specific instructions that are made. And basically the starting point there is, if they ask for a report, you need to give a report format. If they want a briefing note, it needs to be a briefing note format. If they want you to specifically leave out a particular topic, you need to leave out that particular topic. You need to know what's involved, as I have up there in a report. You need to use full sentences. The examining team are very specific about this, and it might be different to some of the other subjects that you've already sat at the strategic professional level, but they want full sentences. Calculations that you perform should be relegated to an appendix. Now, when I say relegated, I don't mean that they're less important. What I mean is you don't do calculations in a word processor. You should do your calculations in a spreadsheet. You need to use headings for the individual components of your answer, and you need to give conclusions, okay? The second of the 4 umbrella areas is skepticism and judgment. This involves you having to explore. It involves you having to question. It involves you having to challenge and critically assess. Now, again, I know what it's like when you look at words like that and you think, well, what does that actually mean? A practical example of what you'd be looking at here is if your director who's asking you to perform an evaluation explains to you that we anticipate that we're going to grow revenue by 20% indefinitely into the future. You need to be a bit skeptical about that. The ability to grow revenue for a company by 20% every year indefinitely into the future probably is not achievable. And you'd need to be picking up on that. So you'd need to be explaining that, look, I've done the calculations as you've asked me to perform. The answer that we've come up with is X. However, it would be questionable as to whether or not this could be achieved based on the fact that I don't really believe that it will be practical for us to assume that we'd be able to grow revenue by 20% indefinitely into the future. You also need to be able to identify, have you access to all of the information that's required? So again, when you're looking at a scenario, you need to be able to identify, is there additional information that would be necessary in order for me to be able to give a definitive answer or to give a definitive recommendation? You also need to be conscious that there might be underlying bias. So when we're looking at a reorganization, the board of directors might have put together a reorganization plan and they might be very upbeat about its potential success, but they may be biased. Or they might be looking at, for example, a proposal that involves an impact on their remuneration. And if it involves an impact on their remuneration, well, then there might be bias where they might be recommending that we take a course of action that will benefit them rather perhaps than benefiting the shareholders who ultimately we should be considering when we're making a decision. Analysis and evaluation is where we get into the calculations. And obviously a big proportion of the marks overall in the exam for AFM will come from calculations. So when we're looking at analysis and evaluation, we're looking at your ability to identify what technique is appropriate, your ability to lay out the calculations in a manner which makes sense, which follows logic, your ability to understand what the figures that you've calculated mean. Okay, and then finally, commercial acumen. And when we're looking at commercial acumen, we're looking at, your general awareness of a business context. You're looking at, for example, if I was to tell you that we enter into 20,000 sales transactions in US dollars every month. So every month we enter into 20,000 US dollar sales transactions, and we're looking to hedge those transactions using forward contracts. And the recommendation that's been put to me, or recommendation that's been put to you, is that we're going to enter into a forward contract for each and every sales transaction. Business acumen, in a lot of instances, is common sense, it wouldn't be practical for us to be able to enter into 20,000 forward contracts. We'd need to live in the bank. We'd need to be in the bank all day, every day, entering into forward contracts. Would it not be a better idea that if we've got 20,000 sales transactions in US dollars every month, that perhaps we'd look at one forward contract for the entire quantity value of those 20,000 sales? So that type of concept, the ability for you to be able to identify that something is reasonable or it's unreasonable in a business context from the point of view of commercial acumen. Okay, in summary, if you're sitting down wondering, would financial management, advanced financial management be for me as an option subject? First thing I'd say to you, which I haven't got up here, is do you like using a calculator? Now, obviously in the exam, you won't be using a calculator, you'll be using, well, you can use your calculator, but primarily you'll be using a spreadsheet. If you don't like doing calculations, this is not a subject for you. No, I'm getting that out of the way at the start. If you do like doing calculations, this subject is right up your street. It's very practical. It very much follows on from the financial management subject. So a sound knowledge of financial management is a huge benefit when you're moving forward into advanced financial management. Lots of calculations are required. Questions won't be as specific as you're used to. So at the earlier levels, you'd have been very, very much directed to what they want you to calculate. So at this level, what they want you to be able to do is use the knowledge that you have of financial management to apply it to a practical setting in order for you to be able to give recommendations and advice. And use a bit of common sense then to identify whether or not the recommendations that you're offering or the information that's been provided to you will allow you to be able to give an answer that could be acted upon and would make sense in the business world. About 40% or thereabouts of the marks that are available on the paper will be available for discussion. Discussion invariably involves you identifying what the answers that you've calculated mean and using those calculated answers in order to be able to give a recommendation. Question practice is key. In order to be successful in this exam, you need to be able to get through as much of each of the 3 questions on the paper as you can in the time that's been allotted. Many of the calculations are repetitive. Things like ungearing a beta factor, pretty much guaranteed to be on the paper. Regearing a beta factor might be required as well. The ability to be able to deal with futures contracts. Do we want to buy or sell futures contracts? How many contracts do we need? How much basis do we have today? How much basis will be outstanding on the date of the transaction? Those types of calculations come up very frequently, and it's only with practice that you get good at doing them as quickly as you need to be able to do them so that you get the calculations performed, and then you can get stuck into your recommendations and your evaluation and your analysis. There will be 20 professional marks available moving forward from September 2022. You want to be picking up as many of those as you can. Very much, however, the professional marks will follow hand in hand with your technical marks. So if you're good technically, you will tend to be good from the point of view of the professional marks, because many of the professional marks that are available are there for your ability to identify which technique to use, your ability to understand whether or not the assumptions that you're basing your calculations on make sense, your ability to understand whether the answer that you come up with is sensible in the context of the business case that's been put forward and that type of stuff. So practicing questions will also get you good at being able to pick up as many of those professional marks as you can. Okay, thanks very much.